We were in a box canyon. There was, high ground to all four sides of you, basically.
We knew that we were in trouble because there's only one way that we can get back out. And then the ridge line just lit up. We were taking fire from everywhere.
That's when I felt like a punch in the back of the head.
All medics come to this truck, Chief's been hit.
Your actions are gonna determine whether or not your teammates live or die. And I wasn't gonna let him die. I wasn't gonna let him die.
The U.S. Army Special Forces were created in 1952, but it wasn't until 1961 that President Kennedy okayed the colorful cap that gave them their name, the Green Berets.
U.S. Special Forces carry out some of the military's riskiest operations. Their work often is secretive.
Only about 150 elite soldiers earn Special Forces status each year through the Army's toughest command school.
I think the difference with Special Forces is that we're senior soldiers.
You didn't have guys recruited right off the street. You had to do some time in the military, and then you volunteered again to be Special Forces.
We usually work in a smaller unit, so because there's less of us, when we go out on missions, Green Berets are exposed a little bit more to the local nationals.
We're basically put into situations where we have to deal with the cultural sensitivities of other people. But, that's what we all volunteered for. That's the kind of thing that we wanted to do.
You're motivated by the people around you. We wanted to make a difference in our area, because if we're gonna be there for 8 months, might as well make it a good 8 months.
Our team was so dynamic. We had such a great cohesive unit. We fed off each other's strengths and weaknesses.
I had a great team at the time. I got the best 7th Special Forces group, the most aggressive team, the guys that are after it.
We're all pretty positive, we're all pretty upbeat, but Romy's just one step above everybody else.
Romy was the warrant officer, and he empowered us to be able to be the team that we needed to be.
I remember somebody telling me that, hey, this is your team. You're the continuity of this group. You're the one that's supposed to hold everybody together. I tried to take care of those guys and made sure that we were doing the missions with everybody's voice involved. That was the number one thing that I wanted, in my head as a commander. Growing up, my childhood, it was full of excitement, full of fun, lots of family, friends. I mean, it was, everything a kid could dream of. Everybody knew me as bouncing off the walls. My dad was a pediatrician in the Army, and then my brothers, they both served. I thought highly of them, and I was like, when I saw them graduate airborne school, I was like, man, that's what I want to do. I thought it was the coolest thing. When I was 12, I took a brown plastic bag and I climbed the roof of my apartment and went ahead and jumped off, and my mom about flipped out. So, but what can you do? As kids, we had no fear. No fear at all. I wanted to follow my brother's footsteps. So I entered the Army when I was 19. From there, you just get motivated and go on from one thing to another to another. So I made the decision to go to Special Forces. I knew that we were gonna do our part in what America was doing, and I believed in that. But I always made sure that my family was in my heart. And, I made sure that I could do my little piece so my wife, Gabby, and my son and daughter could live, the great life that we live here in the United States.
There is a guerrilla war going on here in the mountains and valleys of Afghanistan. The last time Special Forces were here, they got ambushed by Taliban, who then slipped away.
They know the mountains like we know our backyard back in the States, and we're on their turf now.
And as you can see from the terrain here, nothing in central Afghanistan is easy.
So in 2008, this was our second deployment into Afghanistan. And at that time, we were really gelling as a team.
We got to Afghanistan, and I mean, we hit the floor running. And about 4 months after we got there, and our company was doing a bigger mission northwest of us. Higher command decided we would go in and support the bigger company mission, but we had to go through Maidan Valley.
That area right there is a major highway of Taliban fighters moving through Kandahar.
Since we knew that there was a village that had been cut off from the main route, we decided to help that village out with medical care.
They weren't the objective for this bigger, larger mission, but we wanted to be able to provide them with something, you know, other than, you know, just being there and occupying, you know.
We were gonna go out and basically set up a little clinic at this village, and I would treat sick and wounded. And, you know, I'd request a female treatment team to, you know, be attached to our unit, because with their culture, you know, they don't allow, you know, men to treat the women.
You know, the hope is, you know, when you bring med supplies in that normally, you know, they're pretty receptive.
And while that was going on, we were gonna be looking for the bad guys, because another mission was happening in a different part of Afghanistan, Shalakor. Commandos were coming in from the south, pushing to the north, and our intel said the enemy would basically, they would run away into an east-west running valley called Maidan.
We were actually put in a blocking position. So my job was to, you know, provide fire.
Now, the thing about Afghanistan that's different from Iraq and other locations is just the terrain is just so treacherous and so dictating on your movement.
At the mouth of it where we entered, there's a, you know, a suspended footbridge, probably 30 feet over the canyon river. So you drove under that thing. And so that's how tight it was in there. And then once you passed that, it kind of opened up, but there was, you know, high ground to all four sides of you. It's basically a box canyon. And the only way we could get through there, because the river ran through it, was to bring a bucket loader and actually build a road through the river that we had to be able to cross to get up in there. When you talk about special operations, that is kind of a unique, unconventional movement, really. And we were able to get into an area that no one else has really been able to get into by utilizing that bucket loader. The canyon was basically a river area with lots of vegetation. You had farm on one side, tilled fields on the other, lots of almond trees, lots of vegetation. You know, pretty difficult area to move through and fight in.
When you're there and you're, you know, doing these missions, you know, you plan and you prep and you take every step to ensure that you guys are gonna make it. But you always have to be prepared for an unsuccessful mission.
You can do the best you can to survive, but you can't control everything.
So September 15th, 2008, our team 7115 packed up and went ahead and left to go execute our mission in Maidan Valley.
It's very difficult to get into that area right there because it was one of the major routes that Taliban fighters used to get into Kandahar. I had a 12-man team. I had a female lieutenant colonel, registered nurse, and then we had support personnel. Guys that were supposed to secure our convoys, and those are Afghan security guards. We also had a platoon of infantry with us as well. We had quite a few vehicles with us. You know, we had very aggressive guys. We had some very senior guys on the team. Steve Hill was a very senior medic in the military.
Steve, being the medic and being one of our snipers, he brought a lot to the table.
I was a soldier before I became a medic. I didn't think of myself as, you know, I'm a medic. I'm a warrior. That's what I'm here. That's what I'm doing. I'm here to, you know, make sure that all my brothers come back alive. My father, he was a Vietnam veteran, and he was a great inspiration for me. So I was kind of a military brat in the early part of my life, and I moved around a lot. I think 13 times before I turned 18 and joined the Army. Because I moved around a lot, I didn't always end up meeting the right people. You know, they have this cadence in the Army, and it says, go to war, go to jail. And it was kind of a situation like that, believe it or not. I did well through basic training, and I just needed more. I didn't really know as much about Special Forces. I just kind of always had a feeling that that's what I wanted to do. I actually got to my team in 2006, and that's when I met Romy and Ian and everybody else that was part of the team. And once you start doing your training together, that's kind of when you start building that bond. You start realizing that these are the men that you're gonna have, your left or right, while you're in combat. I think because I moved around so much, and I don't have those roots and those people in my past, that it's so important to me now. And that's why that team forever will be my family.
That night, September 15th, we went in and, you know, received fires right off the bat.
We were at this part right before we were entering the mouth of the valley, and we made our first contact. I remember they came out with a lob of RPG rounds. And I just remember being in the turret and like looking and seeing the RPGs just coming out of the mountain. Some of them were air bursting, some of them were duds and skipping and hitting the ground, some of them were, you know, detonating on impact. That was just the beginning, that mission, and we were pretty much in contact the entire time, fighting our way to get to that position to support the larger mission. Right before we got to this one particular part, I remember looking and seeing the tracer rounds around the vehicle in front of me. And I was thinking to myself, those guys are toast, they're done. I was a Mark 19, which is a grenade launcher, and I turned the turret and shooting a can of Mark 19 rounds up, you know, where we're receiving fire, trying to suppress the enemy. Once we had suppressed the enemy and we pushed out security elements and stuff, I jumped out of the turret and I went up to the truck, and there wasn't a scratch on anyone. Everybody was fine. Their vehicle was Swiss cheese. All 4 tires shot out, the radiator, you know, got shot out.
We've been lucky. You know, we had guys shot between the legs, missed everything. We had a guy that, you know, got hit with an RPG. You know, nothing happened. You know, it's all about luck, I guess. I don't know. Bucket loader was moving up to the far end of the canyon to cut the road for us, or to help improve the road for us to get our vehicles up in there.
About 3/4 of the way up, the Afghans had dug this irrigation like trench, And it was large enough to where we weren't capable of driving our vehicles over top of it. So we get the bulldozer, and the bulldozer, scoops up some earth and rock, and it's driving up the side of the mountain, and it goes and drops some stuff inside this irrigation ditch.
As the bucket loader was clearing the road and the path, it kind of tiptoed on its side and rolled over.
And this 18-ton, bulldozer comes crashing down on top of itself.
And we were stuck at that point.
We knew that we were in trouble because we kind of have the ability to hear the enemy. They use radios sometimes that we're capable of, intercepting their transmissions, and we have interpreters, and all of the interpreters were like, hey, they know that the vehicle is down, and they're calling for all the fighters in the region to come to this area because there's only one way that we can get back out.
I think it's pretty late at night at this point when that bucket loader rolled down the hill. And where we were in that box canyon was the village that we wanted to provide the support to. But at that point, it became a recovery mission of the bucket loader. So we never really pulled the medical supplies out to give to those people.
At that time, the mission kind of changed because now we have a big hazard that we have to take care of. There was no way we could recover that piece of equipment.
There was no getting it out. You're not gonna get a crane back there, you're not gonna get helicopters in there. It was done.
The problem is we've got to secure this bucket loader until the command decides whether we can destroy it in place or what we're gonna do with it. So, and of course we also have the follow-on mission. We were not in a great spot to support. However, we were still within striking distance.
Ian was great because he knew his job. I mean, without a doubt, he was directing the Afghan National Army, police, and constantly staying on top of us and seeing what we needed. And it made him great to be with, especially in situations like that.
I was the oldest guy on the team. In 1987, I was 20 years old. I had just left college, decided college wasn't for me, and decided I was gonna do something different, so I joined the military. I just walked into the recruiter station. That's what happened. Special Forces never really entered my mind. I mean, they were the guys down the street at Fort Lewis, Washington, that wore, Green Berets, and you had Rangers there too. My friend came back from Desert Storm and said, I'm gonna go to selection. And I said, well, I'm gonna go too. So the next week I volunteered to go to selection. I went. Years later, I volunteered to go to 7th Special Forces Group. And I became the team sergeant, which is basically in charge of all the enlisted men.
You've got leaders that, when they get in those stressful situations and they're frantic and they can't control themselves and they're all over the place. And he wasn't like that. Ian was very, very, very calm and cool. He's just always very, very low stress.
Ian was, a great team sergeant, and I remember everything he did for the team.
It's just, team camaraderie, 12 guys living and working together and every day. That's your family. So after the bucket loader rolled, we had some Afghan forces with us who we sent to the high ground to secure it. And then Romy and I cleared the high ground villages up there. So we were able to secure the canyon pretty well. And then we basically waited the night out to see if we got called from the other unit for support. So we stayed there until the mission was complete, basically.
I want to say it was about 8 hours until we finally got permission to blow this thing up and return to base.
So Romy and Ruiz are engineers who are explosive experts. They went up there and they, rigged the bucket loader with explosives.
We needed to make sure that it was destroyed and that the enemy couldn't end up, taking it apart and then reassembling it.
We strapped a lot of explosives to it and blew it up to where all the pieces would be inoperable. We decided to return to base because that was a lot of explosives to blow that big of a piece of equipment. We had just made a big signature. We drew a lot of attention to ourselves. And I remember as we were pulling out, the ambush kicked off. It was like 4th of July.
At that point, we started to leave with all our support people. With the Afghans, of course, we had to bring them off the hill. So we started moving people out of the high ground. We had to move the infantry platoon back as well.
I was in the turret of one vehicle, and Romy and my best friend Ramon were in the other vehicle. And me and Romy were just talking about going to Bike Week and going to Sturgis and like all the things that we wanted to do when we got back from our trip.
And I remember as we were pulling out, the ambush kicked off.
The ridge lines and the mountain just lit up.
It was about 25 to 30 insurgents at the time. They were coming from the wood line in the village, the high ground. It was pretty chaotic. RPGs, rifle fire, AK-47s all over the place. You could see the tracers, the green tracers, red tracers, all around us. I grabbed the interpreter that we had who was with the nurses. I told her to go in the front seat of the Humvee and to put her head down because things were gonna get crazy. I always made sure that if anything ever happened, I tried to be out front.
We were taking fire from everywhere. You could hear rounds cracking past your head. They're hitting the vehicle.
We were taking fire from both ridge lines. Steve Hill was actually having trouble firing through the trees because they were already in the river.
I'm sitting there next to the water, and I looked down, and one of the females that we had brought with us, Sandy, she was a dental tech. She was on the 240 machine gun, and she was just getting down. And I remember her shooting, and I was looking at her, and I was like, that is a warrior. And, she was firing rounds, and then, she ran out, and she was in the process of changing, and I remember looking, and all of a sudden, in the water, I could see bullets hitting the water, and the water was splashing, and it was coming right at our truck. I remember, telling everybody to take cover, and as soon as the rounds went over the top of the vehicle, I just turned the turret, and I'm like, just tried to line up from where those rounds went, and I just started throwing grenades down.
I was about to enter the river, and so I was still in that area right there and was able to drop a couple mortars.
I'm returning fire, and I had to reach down to grab some more 203 grenades. And then all of a sudden, that's when I felt like a punch in the back of the head. That's the only thing I remember from that part.
I heard the call that Romy was shot, and they need all medics to his truck.
All medics come to this truck, Chief's been hit.
As soon as we got the call and we were the vehicle right behind him, we were there. I mean, we're talking 30 seconds. Our vehicle pulled up right next to theirs. So I was in the top of our vehicle. I jumped out and into the back of their vehicle where he was shot. And then that's when I started doing my treatment. I saw Romy and there's blood everywhere. I don't know, that's the one thing about the training that we do. We're constantly, just training to when it comes down to actually doing it, it's almost like muscle memory. It's like a reflex. It's happening so fast that you don't even realize what's going on. There wasn't a lot of room to work in the back of the truck, so I was actually straddled over top of Romy. He was laying on his back. And I took my hearing protection out so I can listen for breath sounds, and I cut his body armor and stuff, and I was going through my treatment protocol, and we originally thought it was a glancing gunshot wound, like it just clipped him. It came in the left side, in his hairline, and when we're there, our hair's long, you grow your beards out and stuff, trying to fit in with the local populace, and so you couldn't even see the entrance wound. Then when I did my initial sweeps on him, I didn't even know. But I just knew because it was a gunshot wound to the neck, I'm assuming there's C-spine involvement. Your C-spine, it goes through the spinal canal, and if something's moved, you can cause more damage. So I said, maintain C-spine until I tell you otherwise. I knew that he had to have an airway, and if we were to intubate him, that would have required us to, change the position of his head, which if we moved his head back like that, then all of that spinal cord damage, it probably would have severed his C-spine, he would have died. I wasn't gonna let him die. I wasn't gonna let him die. Romy wasn't breathing, and he didn't have any vitals. He didn't have a pulse. And I remember I was getting ready to make the cut on his neck. We were taking some heavy fire from the rear, and Reese, he turned and he just lets out this like 20-round burst right over my head. And a 50 cal machine gun has an overpressure that's it's crazy. And I remember I looked up and he's looking down at me, and I said, give me 5 seconds. And he nodded like that, and he turned off, and he started shooting to the front, and I looked down at Romy, and I'm like, please, God. And I made the initial incision. I didn't have any crike, anything, no trach hooks, nothing, just the razor blade and an ET tube. And I take it, and I passed the tube in, and it felt right going in. I'm like, all right, it's passed. And I got placement. I got the bag, and I'm having to straddle him, bag and give him air, and then engage the enemy until we could fight ourselves to a safe location and actually call for a medevac bird in.
Of course, as soon as we, circled up in that open area, my gunners all sat on the guns and were firing at the high ground. And then we went over to Romy's truck. When I looked at his eyes, they were leathery, black, leathery. Romy's dead. We're all in there, cussing Romy out to breathe. Breathe. And he did.
And I remember seeing his chest rise and fall, and then immediately his color started coming back.
Steve saved his life. And when he gasp that breath. I mean, it just, hey man, he's gonna make it.
But even though I had brought him back, because of the level of his injury, he couldn't breathe on his own.
So we tried to stabilize the neck as best we could, you know, trying to lift him out of the truck, keeping his head, you know, stabilized, and then getting him on the ground.
I remember telling the junior medic, I was like, your sole purpose until I tell you otherwise is to maintain proper alignment.
We were still taking fire at the time, and it was another mad minute, you know, because we wanted to flush out all the bad guys.
And we were on the side of the vehicle, and I was prepping him for transport. And Romy had given up his position in the TC seat, which is the passenger seat of the vehicle, an armored vehicle. So he had a spot where he would have been safe, and he gave that spot up for one of the female interpreters. Her name was Soraya. I remember as I was packaging him up, I saw Soraya just looking down at Romy, just tears coming down her eyes. I looked at her, I'm like, it's gonna be okay. And then the bird came in. The medevac, they didn't want to come in because we were taking direct fire. They didn't want to come into a hot LZ.
The medevac must have said, we're gonna land no matter what, because they came in. If you'd see the canyon where they had to land, and knowing that we were taking fire up to the last minute, I'm surprised they landed.
And right as the bird was coming in, they're like, you're going with them. I remember looking out the side of the bird as we started to pull out, and the team starting to move on again. And I remember seeing the ridge lines and I remember them shooting, you know, their machine guns, and just taking a moment and praying and saying, God, please watch over them. And I looked down, and Romy's got his eyes open, and he mouths to me, what happened? And of course, I was a wreck, and I was like, you got shot, dude. I was like, but you're okay, you're stable. We're getting you out of here. You're gonna see your family soon. And I just remember him. He always does this thing with his lips, and he goes like that. He closed his eyes.
The birds left, you know, everything was quiet, and we went ahead and finished exfilling it to get everybody out of there. And with mixed emotions, you know, that we got him out was huge. But you know, we still didn't know whether he was gonna live. You know, after Rummy got hit, and we stayed back to make sure everybody got out of there in an orderly fashion. The mission was complete, basically. Later on, you know, we were getting all sorts of rumors, you know, so he's doing all right, or, you know, but you still, prognosis was that I don't think they were sure that he was gonna live until much later, until almost when he got to Walter Reed.
I received this phone call from one of his teammates asking me, hey, Gabby, how are you? And I was like, yeah, I'm good. Why? But immediately I felt something weird. I mean, I was cold and shaking. I remember asking, is he alive? And he said, we don't know yet.
The actual injury was pretty bad. That's when we found out that the trajectory had gone across the backside of his C-spine. He had spinal cord damage.
I drove from North Carolina to Washington, D.C. to Walter Reed Medical Center. His brother, I remember that he said, Romulo, he's paralyzed, and he's looking really bad. they took me to his room to see for the first time my husband.
When I came to and I see Gabby next to me, I thought I'd just died and gone to heaven.
Well, by that time, our son was 18 months old. And I said, Romulo, look who's here, Andres. And he was smiling. He was so happy to see his son. And I say, you know what day is today? And he said, no, today is my birthday. And he was like, wow, happy birthday. And I say, and you are my best gift.
At the time, I was just happy, to be there with them. In my eyes, I thought that 6 months top, I'd be out. My spinal cord would get better and I'd be back. When they told me I was replaced on a team, I think I spent, a good couple of days thinking about it. What am I gonna do now?
The first time that his teammates came to the hospital, and I remember seeing all of them around his bed. It was like 10 guys kissing him, hugging him.
I've never told so many men in my life that I love them, or kissed men in the cheek as much as I do those guys.
They were there, supporting him. Hey, bro, don't worry about it. We're gonna be with you.
I went down with all the guys. Actually, we came back, and it's emotional. It was bad, but Gabby stops you at the door and says, it's all right.
The first 3 years, I think after he was wounded, it was difficult for me to go visit him because I didn't know if I would have wanted to have been saved and live in the condition with the disability that Romy has. I had, I guess, survivor's guilt. Forrest Gump. Remember Lieutenant Dan? I should have died on the battlefield. I was supposed to be a war hero. That's what I thought. I thought, maybe that's what he wanted. But after time and seeing the things that Romy was doing and seeing that even though he was disabled, he was living. He was living.
Life doesn't stop. I still have to be a father, still have to be a husband, a brother, and I don't stop.
He's a real warrior, and he say, you know what? This is not gonna stop me. I'm gonna keep moving, Gabby, you will see. They say no, but they don't have the last word.
There's a lot of wounded vets that have come back and they haven't had the support that Romy has, and they haven't recovered the way Romy has. And they've lost their families, and they're depressed. They need help.
I know for a fact that if I didn't have Gabby or Andres or Alina, that I probably wouldn't be sitting here today. I'd probably be depressed or, sitting there all medicated, wondering how the hell I'm gonna drive my chair into a pool.
I always say this, paralysis is not an individual issue, it's a family issue.
Gabby, being who she is, said, you know what, Romy, let's open up a rehabilitation center here in Tampa. And, we decided to call it Stay in Step.
It is a program with a sense of family.
I feel fortunate and blessed to have been a part of all of it. And he wants me to come work for him, and be a trainer and be a part of that and help other families recover.
If God picked somebody to lead other people to walk, he picked Ranger Camargo.
I'm here today because of those guys, and to me, they're all my brothers.
That's what BNSF is about. You know, you love the guys on your team, and you've got to have that tight bond with them. That, you know, that's what you do. You know, that's your job.
That was the beauty of that team. Everybody knew what their job was. It's almost like nothing had to be said. Everybody just knew what they had to do. And that is what made it so amazing.
I'd do it all over again. Wouldn't change a thing. I don't even think about it.
Wow.